the final seconds. If you're ready to step into the darkest corners of real-world crime, hit subscribe, smash like, and drop a comment with where you're watching from, because what you're about to hear is one of those stories that will crawl under your skin and refuse to leave. Welcome. Tonight, we're inside a moment that unfolded in seconds, yet sent shockwaves across an entire nation. A quiet Minnesota neighborhood. A sudden law enforcement operation. Shouting. Panic. And then gunfire. What really happened in those final seconds? The first shot cracked through the cold afternoon air like a thunderclap. At exactly the moment when most people were finishing lunch, stepping out for coffee, or driving home from work, a small residential street in Minnesota transformed into a crime scene. Sirens screamed. Doors slammed. Neighbors froze behind curtains. And somewhere in the chaos, a man lay critically wounded. Witnesses later described it as pure confusion, voices overlapping, commands shouted, people scrambling for cover. 1 second it was just another day. The next, the street was locked down by armed officers, flashing lights, and yellow tape snapping in the wind. This was supposed to be a routine law enforcement operation involving federal immigration officers. Instead, it spiraled into a violent confrontation that now sits at the center of a growing national storm. According to early reports, ICE officers arrived in the area to carry out an arrest. The details remain tightly guarded, but neighbors say multiple unmarked vehicles rolled in almost simultaneously. Doors flew open. Armed agents moved fast, fanning out across the street with tactical precision. At first, people assumed it was a drug bust. But then the shouting began. Get on the ground. Don't move. Show me your hands. Voices echoed between the houses, bouncing off brick walls and frozen pavement. Some residents stepped onto their porches, trying to understand what was happening. Others grabbed their phones, instinctively recording, sensing that something was about to go very wrong. And then, in a heartbeat, it did. A man reportedly attempted to flee. Whether he was running in fear, confusion, or desperation is still unknown. What is known is that within seconds, shots rang out. Not one. Not two. Multiple. The sound cut through the neighborhood like shattered glass. People screamed. Someone dropped their phone. A woman collapsed behind a parked car, sobbing, convinced she had just watched someone die. When the echoes finally faded, a body lay motionless on the pavement. Emergency responders flooded the scene within minutes. Paramedics fought to stabilize the wounded man as officers secured the perimeter. Police tape went up. Streets were sealed. Helicopters hovered overhead, casting long, spinning shadows across rooftops. By nightfall, the neighborhood looked like a war zone. Authorities confirmed that the individual was critically injured and rushed to a nearby trauma center. His condition remains unclear. Officials released only limited information, citing an active investigation. But what little they did say only deepened the mystery. They claimed the entire encounter lasted less than 30 seconds. 30 seconds. That's all it took to ignite a nationwide debate. As news spread, outrage erupted almost instantly. Social media exploded with conflicting narratives, emotional reactions, and unanswered questions. Civil rights groups demanded transparency. Law enforcement unions defended the officers' actions. Politicians rushed to stake their positions before the full story had even emerged. But behind the headlines and hashtags lies a deeper, more unsettling truth. Because this wasn't just about one man and one operation. This was about fear, power, and a system stretched to its breaking point. Investigators began reconstructing the moments leading up to the shooting. Body camera footage was seized. Radio transmissions were analyzed. Witness statements poured in, and they didn't all match. Some residents said the man was unarmed. Others claimed he reached toward his waistband. A few insisted he was confused and didn't even realize who was confronting him. Every version painted a different picture. And each one raised the same haunting question. Did this have to end in gunfire? Inside the command center, officials replayed the footage again and again, slowing it down frame by frame, dissecting each movement, each shadow, each fraction of a second. What they were looking for wasn't just what happened, but why. Then came the discovery that shifted the entire investigation. Buried deep in the incident logs was a detail that hadn't been mentioned publicly. Something so critical, it forced internal affairs to step in almost immediately. A procedural anomaly. One step in the operation that, according to protocol, should never have occurred. When supervisors realized what it was, the room reportedly fell silent. Because if confirmed, it could mean the confrontation was not only preventable, but the result of a catastrophic decision made moments before the first shout was ever heard. And as federal investigators began quietly retracing the planning stages of that operation, they uncovered something else. A piece of information that suggested this arrest may not have been as routine as it first appeared. But when they opened the sealed operational file and read the final authorization note, what they found changed everything. The hidden orders. Before we go any further, pause for just 1 second. If you want the full truth behind cases like this, hit subscribe right now, because the next detail you're about to hear is the kind that changes how you see everything. And while you're watching, drop a comment with your thoughts, because this case is dividing the nation. Inside a secured federal building, investigators gathered around a long steel table as the sealed operational file was finally opened. The room smelled faintly of burnt coffee and printer toner. Screens glowed. Hard drives hummed. And as the first pages were reviewed, a disturbing pattern began to emerge. This operation was never supposed to happen the way it did. According to protocol, arrests in residential areas require layered authorization, especially when tactical teams are involved. But in this case, one of those required approvals was fast-tracked, pushed through in a way that bypassed standard safeguards. The signature on the final authorization belonged to a senior official who, just days earlier, had been reprimanded for excessive use of force complaints linked to previous operations. That alone raised red flags. Digging deeper, investigators discovered that the target of the arrest, the man now fighting for his life, had no violent criminal record. His file showed a series of minor immigration violations, nothing that suggested he was armed, dangerous, or likely to resist. Yet the operational notes described him as potentially hostile, justifying a heavily armed response. The answer seemed to lie in a classified intelligence tip that arrived less than 12 hours before the operation. The tip claimed the suspect was connected to a broader network under federal investigation. But when analysts traced the source, they found something alarming. The tip was unverified, uncorroborated, and based on a single anonymous report. In other words, a major tactical operation had been launched on a theory, not evidence. As investigators reconstructed the timeline, a chilling sequence unfolded. The planning meeting had lasted just 20 minutes. Risk assessments were rushed. Surveillance data was incomplete. Yet the green light was given anyway. And then there was the positioning. Bodycam footage revealed that officers approached from multiple angles, cutting off every visible escape route. One team blocked the front. Another sealed the back. A third moved in from the side alley. The suspect was effectively trapped inside a tightening circle. When officers issued their first commands, neighbors say they came all at once, overlapping and conflicting. Hands up. Don't move. Get down. Turn around. To an untrained civilian, the noise alone would have been overwhelming. Now imagine hearing all of that while surrounded by armed men, in unmarked vehicles, with no clear understanding of who they are or what they want. This is where the timeline fractures. Some witnesses insist the man froze, raising his hands. Others say he hesitated, looking back and forth, searching for an escape. Surveillance footage captured him taking 2 steps backward, then pivoting sharply. That pivot became the defining moment. Officers interpreted it as an attempt to flee. One agent later testified that he believed the suspect was reaching for a weapon. But no firearm was recovered at the scene. A folding utility knife was found in the man's jacket pocket, unopened. The trigger was pulled anyway. And just like that, the street erupted. If you're still watching, comment, staying till the end, because what investigators uncovered next points to a deeper chain of accountability, and it's something most people will never hear about. As internal affairs combed through communication logs, they uncovered a flurry of encrypted messages sent between supervisors just hours before the operation. The tone was urgent, pressured. almost frantic. One message read, "We need a result today. No delays." Another, "Make this one count." The language suggested a broader agenda, not simply an arrest, but a demonstration, a show of force, a signal. This raised an unsettling possibility. Was this operation designed less to capture one man and more to send a message? Meanwhile, the suspect's family sat in a hospital waiting room, trapped in a nightmare they couldn't wake up from. They described him as quiet, hardworking, terrified of law enforcement, and deeply protective of his children. To them, the idea that he posed a threat was impossible to accept. As public outrage intensified, protesters gathered outside government buildings, holding signs, chanting for justice, demanding transparency. Lawmakers called emergency hearings. Civil rights attorneys prepared lawsuits. And across the country, millions watched grainy phone footage, replaying the same haunting moment over and over, searching for answers in the blur of motion and sound. And here's where you should hit like, because the more this story spreads, the harder it becomes to bury. Your support pushes these investigations into the spotlight. But the most explosive development came late that night, when analysts discovered a hidden layer inside the operational file. A redacted annex. It referenced a separate ongoing federal investigation, one so sensitive that even local law enforcement had not been briefed. The annex suggested the suspect may have been mistakenly linked to another individual with a similar name, someone with deep ties to organized crime. A case of mistaken identity. If true, the sentence that changed everything. Before we dive into the final revelations, do this one thing. Hit subscribe right now, because what you're about to hear is the kind of truth that rarely sees daylight. And if any part of this story has shaken you, tap like and leave a comment. Your engagement keeps cases like this alive when powerful forces want them buried. The audio file was barely 30 seconds long. 30 seconds that would rip this investigation wide open. When analysts isolated the background noise, enhanced the waveform, and filtered out the overlapping voices, a single sentence cut through the chaos, calm, deliberate, and unmistakably clear. "Take him down. We can't let this one walk." The room went dead silent. Every investigator understood the weight of those words. This wasn't a panicked command shouted in fear. It was a directive, measured, intentional, and issued before any visible threat had emerged. For the first time, the possibility of premeditation entered the investigation. And that changed everything. Federal prosecutors were immediately notified. Internal Affairs sealed the recording. A joint task force was activated. Subpoenas were drafted within hours. Because if that sentence could be traced back to a commanding officer, it meant the shooting wasn't just tragic, it was criminal. As analysts worked backward through communication logs, they uncovered a web of connections that stretched far beyond Minnesota. The same senior official who authorized the operation had approved multiple aggressive raids over the past year, raids that disproportionately resulted in injury, property damage, and civil rights complaints. Patterns began to emerge. Each operation followed the same blueprint: rushed authorization, vague intelligence tips, heavily armed teams, and immediate narrative control after the fact. Press releases were issued within minutes. Footage was withheld. Critical details were classified. It wasn't just about enforcement. It was about optics. Demonstrating strength. Projecting dominance. Sending a message. But this time, something had gone wrong. And now the entire system was scrambling to contain the fallout. If you're still watching, comment, "Truth matters," because this next part reveals how close this case came to being erased completely. Less than 24 hours after the shooting, a silent legal maneuver was executed behind closed doors. A motion was filed to transfer jurisdiction of the case, shifting oversight away from independent state investigators and into a sealed federal review process, one notorious for slow timelines and limited public disclosure. In simple terms, bury it. But a single federal clerk, disturbed by the mounting inconsistencies, leaked the transfer order to an investigative journalist. Within hours, headlines exploded across national media. The attempted cover-up had been exposed. Public pressure surged. Lawmakers demanded emergency hearings. Civil liberties organizations mobilized. And for the first time, senior officials found themselves facing something they hadn't anticipated: accountability. As the pressure mounted, a protected whistleblower came forward. Their testimony would become the backbone of the case. They revealed that the intelligence tip justifying the operation had been flagged internally as unreliable. That warning was overridden. Risk assessments were altered. And during the planning phase, a direct instruction was given to force resolution. Force resolution. In law enforcement language, it meant ending the encounter quickly, by any means necessary. That instruction aligned perfectly with the audio recording. Suddenly, the narrative shifted from tragic accident to deliberate escalation. Meanwhile, the wounded man remained in critical condition, hovering between life and death. His family waited, trapped in an agonizing limbo. They didn't know whether to prepare for recovery or farewell. Their pain became the human center of a national debate. Protests intensified. Court filings stacked up. Political careers began to wobble. And as investigators closed in, one final discovery surfaced: a classified memo buried in a restricted server. It outlined a strategic initiative aimed at increasing arrest statistics in high-visibility operations, regardless of risk level. The goal was simple: results that could be showcased. Numbers over nuance. Impact over restraint. The Minnesota operation was listed as a priority target. At that moment, the full picture came into focus. This wasn't about one man. It was about a system under pressure to perform, and the devastating consequences when performance is valued above human life. If this story has opened your eyes, hit like and subscribe, because the next case we uncover goes even deeper. Days later, indictments were announced. 2 supervisors were placed on administrative leave. A commanding officer resigned. Federal prosecutors confirmed an ongoing criminal review. And internal communications were ordered released under court supervision. But even as accountability began to take shape, the most haunting revelation was yet to come. Doctors finally stabilized the wounded man. Against overwhelming odds, he survived. When investigators interviewed him, still weak and heavily medicated, he recounted the moment everything changed. He said he turned because he heard someone shout his name, a name he hadn't given. In that split second, he realized he had been mistaken for someone